council's comment from the meeting that just concluded about 10 minutes ago. I will wait for some more people to file in, and then we will start. Or that is to say, I will start. I'll give it just about another 30 seconds or so. Hi, Maya. Just wait for a few more people and a little bit more time, and then I'll begin. And again, this is my first comment to the city council's comment. Hey, Jimmy, from the meeting that concluded 10 minutes, approximately 10 minutes ago. Okay. First thing I want to mention is Recreation Department Director Todd Dickman. He mentioned the tree planting at Vreeland Park, I believe it was, and how it would make for a good buffer in that. And while I agree with that, it's always a good idea to have more trees planted. I'm glad the city of Riverview is doing it. I'm glad to hear that. Also, Azita Fratelli, who's the head of the Riverview Public Library, she'd mentioned how the library was still closed, which I didn't know it was, because of what she called a bug situation. I don't know if that's a computer bug. I don't know if suddenly the library got magically infested with insects. She was nondescript about that, but hopefully there will be some more information from her about this, and if not, I certainly at the next city council meeting will pursue this, if not before. Also, I found it ironic that though before the last city council meeting, that would be the one on September 2nd, due to Labor Day being on the 1st, that there was no moment of silence for the kids in Minnesota who got shot. However, there was a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk. And while I don't begrudge there being a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk, why, when 2 people get killed and 24 injured in Minnesota because of a shooter that opens fire, is there not a moment of silence for them? I found that to be totally disappointing and completely ironic, to say the least. There was a lot of conversation about the landfill. I'm going to have more about the landfill because that was Mayor Swift's article in the Riverview Register. For those of you who live outside the city of Riverview, if you go to, I believe it is riverviewregister.com, you will find the current edition of the newspaper, and you will find Mayor Swift's comments in that. And that's what I will be addressing in a couple of days or so. And he had a lot to say about the landfill and the closure of it. And I will have to bring some of you up to speed as to the history of that, because it has a rather extensive history. However, if you go to cityofriverview.com's site and you look under the videos where the archive videos are, there is a story, and you have to go all the way to the back of it. There was a story where the city of Riverview was on 2020, back when Mayor Rotherville was mayor, and this is well over, I think it was in 1980, well, it was like in the 90s, they did the story, but he was mayor all the way up until 2000, and, I want to say, or 1999, I think it was from 79 to 1999. Unfortunately, he's not around anymore for that, but that will give you a lot of background as to the history of this landfill, which has been around now for well over 50 years and is very integral to the city and its function, financial function and the like. One thing that Sally Sutherland brought up, she spoke about some of this with the landfill. And again, I'm not going to get into the landfill specifically, but I do want to get into some of the comments she made about Mayor Swift. One that stands out is that she said he has a tendency to blame everyone but himself. That's not a quote, but that's pretty close to it. And that, hey, Chevy. The one thing I will say is I totally agree with this. He will blame anybody and everybody under the sun, especially yours truly, just so he can not have to take any heat himself, even though he is the quote unquote leader of the city. But to me, he's more like a figurehead, to say the least. And I think that's all he really wants to be anyway, because when he actually has to govern, it's not a pretty sight, to be sure. She also had mentioned, or mentioned, I'm sorry, one thing I wanted to add to her comments is he also has a tendency to duck and dodge topics, especially mine. And if you go to the archives and look, and I would say you look at any February or August meeting of the last several years, not August of last year, but I would say 2022, 23, I think February 2023, and listen to my Rodents in Riverview speech. You'll notice that every time I've asked questions about it, he hasn't answered it. And even as recently as the September 2nd, 2025 meeting, he has not addressed any of that as well. It's just ridiculous in that. And hang on just a second, guys. I've got to moderate somebody because they don't know how to be respectful, and we are going to be respectful in this place, especially since this is my channel. Thank you, Brian. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying, Miss Sutherland also went well past the 5 minutes in my estimation. I didn't time it, but it seemed like it was well past it. And I didn't, with the questions, and considering that when questions are being answered live, that counts against the speaker's 5 minutes. There's no doubt in my mind she went well past 5 minutes. I find it ironic that Mayor Swift wants to cut me off the second it hits 5 minutes. And also, before he was a council member, Councilmember Webb, who sits on the right-hand side at the end, speak for 16 minutes a few years ago. So you can see there's no consistency with this whatsoever with Mayor Swift whatsoever in time moderation. So while he's big on the 5 minutes, he just does that to try to cut me off, essentially. And it's ridiculous. The other thing is State Representative Riley Linting was there, and I think she's glad that I didn't show up. Just to give you a little bit of background about her, is I have called her office several times. She's a fairly new state representative. She's only 22 or 23 years old, something like that. And she certainly acts like it, and did tonight with all her tittering and all that, which really was embarrassing, at least from my standpoint. But also, she was allowed to speak in the Riverview Register, which I thought was interesting because one of the mayoral candidates from 2 years ago, Chuck Norton, had mentioned to me how he was not allowed to take out an ad in the register. I didn't try because I feared I wouldn't be allowed and they would make it very expensive on me. But yet, State Representative Linting, who is a Republican, and bear in mind that Mayor Swift is very much a Democrat, as is the entire council, as far as I know. It's like they have some sort of sweetheart deal worked out or something, because I've called her office repeatedly trying to get some resolution, trying to get somebody to investigate the city of Riverview, and her office essentially just shut me down to the point where I just want nothing to do with her. And she talked about how she was quote unquote accessible. No, this is not accessibility. This is just typical politics, and it's done Riverview style. And we don't need a state representative that's in the pocketbook of Mayor Swift, as far as I'm concerned. And while she may not be yet, he hasn't had to pay her a lot of money, if anything, it's just ridiculous, and it's sad, and it speaks to her lack of experience and perhaps her naivety due to her lack of years that she's lived. One thing I did like is Councilmember Prey mentioning that the huge tipping fee increase. And just so you know, tipping fees are what the landfill is charged or vis-a-vis has to charge to take care of the trash within the city. And bear in mind, it's not just Riverview's trash we take care of the entire areas. And one thing I thought was interesting that State Representative Linting was talking about is how, because of interstate commerce, we cannot stop trash from being transported to other states, and therefore we must take that. But conceivably, that would take up and fill the landfill even faster than it was. So, it's just ridiculous to say the least on that. But hopefully, hopefully she can do what she says, and we can get the tipping fees not increased at all, or very, very minimally, because a huge tipping fee increase could break the city of Riverview. There's no joke about that. And there's a lot more discussion on that in the September 2nd meeting to that. One thing that Ken Kyleman, who was a frequent speaker, especially the last couple of years at the city council meeting, mentioned is he had mentioned there was $40 million set aside from the landfills of 2016. My understanding was when I had heard it was actually 30 million. That was a couple of years ago, but I won't dispute his figure on that. One thing I don't know, and I don't know whether he's right or not, is he said with interest that figure would be between 60 and 70 million dollars now had it not been touched by the city. Well, we'll see what happens with that. I don't know what that figure would be. Not a clue. I doubt it would be 60 to 70 million dollars at even a moderate interest rate. But point being is that it got touched, and that city could have had a lot more money. I do agree with him with that, to be sure. Excuse me. And then in council comments, Councilmember Brian Webb talked about the 2040 vision plan. And my question is, what happened to the 2030 vision plan? I mean, I know we're getting awfully close to it now, but then again, this is Riverview. What do you expect? However, he and council members Robbins and Gunaga got dealt a rough hand, as they're still fairly new, and council member Prey as well. But in terms of council members Workman and O'Neill, there's no question this should have been worked on a long time ago. And it's a failing of the council, and it's a failing of this city that there wasn't a 2030 vision plan some 10 years ago at least. Councilmember Webb also had a question about could some of the marijuana money, as we just opened dispensaries a couple of years ago, be used for addiction prevention and treatment. And Mayor Swift talked about how there was a state plan already in place for that, which may be the case, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be putting money towards treatment, especially if we're going to be selling it here. And I thought that was a great question by Councilmember Webb. And it kind of got skirted a little bit, but I think it could have been, the nail could have hit the hammer on that a bit more. And then also, he brought up how there could be a police officer in the schools. Well, part of the last budget was to increase the department from where it was, and I believe it was at 19 officers at that time due to Lieutenant Christopher Merritt's retirement. And hang on, we got somebody else that needs to be moderated. Give me a moment. Okay, anyway, he talked about how there could be a police officer in the schools, but there's already ought to have been one as of the last budget, because one was already budgeted for that. Where I disagree with that is, instead of taking a senior officer, take one of the younger officers and put that officer in the school. But the city won't do that because that's just simply too logical. And if it's that logical and it makes too much sense, the city will not do it, for sure. And hang on. I'm going to ask people to behave themselves, because you're only interfering with those who are trying to listen to this. So please be respectful, or I will remove you every time. In any event, as I was saying, it was already budgeted. I thought there was already a police officer in the school. Apparently there's not. And according to Chief Allen, we only have 21 officers again, yet we just added an officer tonight. So that ought to take it to 22. And I'm very tempted to sit down and list every officer I know and find out how come we still are one short, or what happened to the one officer who now suddenly disappeared, and that we're still at 21. That is extremely questionable. And then to conclude all of this, Councilmember O'Neill at the very end, she mentioned, and I want to make sure I have this right, she asked, was the police department fully staffed? Now, bear in mind, Councilmember O'Neill is married to Sean O'Neill, and if you look at the July 21st meeting from last year, you will see where then Sergeant O'Neill, who was the same person, he got promoted to lieutenant, coincidentally enough, not long after he arrested me. That is his wife, and of course, she's always looking out for the police department, so much so that Chief John Allen, before a council meeting one time, and I wish I would have recorded this, but I didn't know it was going to happen, he got into my face and started to yell right in front of her. And you think she said anything about it? Of course not. Why? Because her husband works for the police department, and it's all part of the blue wall of silence. And coincidentally enough, Mayor Swift was not there. Anybody who wants to doubt me on that, you can go look at the first meeting of May of last year. I believe it was May 4th, and you can see that Mayor Swift, in fact, was not there. Fortunately, you can't see Chief Allen yelling in my face because he knows how to be cagey like that. But then again, not going to be like that forever, to be sure. In a few days, I will have my response to Mayor Swift article in the Riverview Register. It is a few pages long. I need to go over it a little bit thoroughly, but I certainly will have a response to that, and I will have a history of the landfill for all of you. But like I said, the best way to get a lot of the history of it is to go look at that 2020 story from sometime in the 90s that's in the City of Riverview's archives. It's towards the very back, and I think it might be the second to last video there, but it's certainly there. It was very educational when I watched it. If you want to learn something about Riverview, that's the place to go. Other than that, my name is Ed Maas. I will see you in a few days when I have my comment to Mayor Swift's article in the Riverview Register about the landfill. Take care, everyone.